All right, Andy here. Welcome to part 2 of the series Serenity in the Trenches. Last time we thought about the positive drives that keep us going in life. And in this part, we're going to be raising a bit of self-awareness about the kind of clues and indicators that tell us we really need to stop and recharge our batteries. We all need to unplug, to take a break, to give ourselves space to recover from time to time. Even if we're doing things that we really enjoy, energy depletion can be kind of insidious. It can creep up on us. So the question we must ask ourselves is what do we need to look out for? How do we know that it's time to recharge our batteries? When it comes to finding serenity in a world that feels like it's falling apart, this is really important. And I love the responses that I've had to this question because it was really enlightening and encouraging for me personally. You know, there's loads of like, aha, that's me moments. So that was really, really good. When I was kind of planning this, I needed to ask the right question. I didn't want it to kind of send us down a negative rabbit hole. I think that asking something like, you know, what causes your batteries to drain might have done this. You know, it could lead us to a place where we're focused on what we don't want. We're focused on something that's negative rather than something that we do want. Because when we recognize the signs that we need to rest, we kind of naturally might look at the sources of what's caused the energy to drain from us. And those sources may well be good things. They often are good things. You know, work you love, relationships you treasure, creative projects from which you get immense pleasure and joy. We don't want to stop doing those things. So the aim of this is to help us recognize the signs so that we can be more effective and manage our time and energy and mood better with the things that we really want to invest our energy into. You know, this will lead us to a more meaningful life, more engagement with those things that matter to us personally. And it will help us to identify the things that don't and the things that we can let go of. But I think it's got to be anchored in a positive sense. So this guides us away from the fatalistic all or nothing thinking where we might say, this is a sign that I need recharging. It comes from spending time with this person, therefore I need to stop spending time with that person. You know, that is not what we're after here. That is not a helpful way of thinking. You know, the battery drain itself is not a problem. You know, things have batteries so they can be used, so that you can unplug them and use them without, you know, attaching them to an electric socket. That's what we're built for. We have a problem when we believe either that we should stay plugged in all the time or that we should keep going until the battery goes flat and then, you know, get frustrated that the thing stopped working, the thing being us. And I hope that by the end of this, you will begin to see how you might maintain a more consistent level of energy throughout daily life, certainly with the next part as well, as the kind of the mirror of this, where we're going to talk about the hows of self-care and rest as well, which is really, really good. Lots of great stuff to get your teeth into there. So, yes, it's about kind of sustainably and creatively investing ourselves in the stuff that matters most to us, recognizing when we need to recharge, and just allowing ourselves to recognize those things as well. Dr. Tracy Cooper says there are two ways of looking at this, in my view. The overstimulation aspect, when we need to withdraw, coupled with the drain on our daily energetic budget and the need to stay in our optimal range of stimulation. There are big events and moments of overstimulation which, for introverts and highly sensitive people, can cause a crash. Having the awareness to know that this is happening will mean that we can withdraw and protect our energy before we're kind of hit for six by an event. You might think of, I don't know, a conference or a sudden conflict at work, for example. You know, those things that kind of just get you. Suddenly you're overstimulated and on a path to immediate burnout. But there's also this consistent need to budget energy and to stay in optimal functioning through our habits, through our everyday patterns of behavior and thinking. These things that need tweaking and refinement from time to time, but ultimately they're the tracks along which our lives go. It's a work in progress, as are we.
I have a hard time figuring out where exactly I need to stop because I know that as soon as I get really into something that I'm doing, whatever it might be my work, or it might be a book, or it might be a conversation, I forget that I'm a human being. I forget that I need to recharge my batteries. I forget that I have batteries. I forget that I am not a robot. And so one of the things that I always notice within myself is my irritability level. That's a very weird word to say, but just my anxiety level and my irritability level. So just watching my emotions and watching myself. My sister told me recently, she's like, you're the most easygoing person on this planet, as long as you don't get tired or hungry. But as soon as you do, then all bets are off. Then you are the most irritable, crazy person, most meanest person on this planet. And so I kind of watch my emotion level. Like if I'm getting irritated by something, normally I don't get irritated by very many things. Very rarely do I get irritated. But as soon as I notice that my gauge of irritability is going down and I'm getting irritated easier, or I'm getting anxious, or my heart starts beating very fast, or I'll notice certain changes in my body, I feel less grounded. Obviously, I'll feel more tired. I'll notice that the people around me are just starting to make me angry, even though these are normally people I love. All of these things will indicate to me that my battery needs to be recharged, because as soon as I start getting all of these signals, signs and signals from my body and my mind, it's a sign that I'm going to reach that point of no return, where I'm going to start saying mean things to people around me, or being angry to the people around me, or just throwing things about and throwing a tantrum. And I don't want to do that. Also, I want to take care of myself.
This is an exercise in self-awareness, becoming aware of what is going on in our mind and body as we get tired and depleted. I love that Boom says that it was her sister that pointed out her tendency to get irritable and crazy. I bet we can all think of other people who get like this. When it happens to us, it can sometimes be hard to see, to take responsibility. We might be tempted to be like, wow, no, it's because they're doing that. I'm annoyed, like I'm right to be annoyed. And actually, it's difficult to see that that's coming from a place of energy depletion. What if our perceived decrease in other people's ability corresponds with our own decreasing energy?
So as an introvert, this can really make or break you, not just knowing when to recharge your batteries, but giving yourself permission to do so. And so for me, I know that my batteries are getting low when I start to feel irritable, and especially when I start to be really hard on myself. And this is the time when a lot of people will fall into the trap of doubling down. So you start to feel bad, like, oh, it's just not good enough. It's not perfect enough yet. And then you start to try and do more. But really, I know from experience that it does not serve me to push through during those times. And what's better is to just stop, take time for self-care, take time to reconnect to my inner self, to the inner artist. And then when I come back to working and to being with people, I can really create from a space of authenticity instead of just doing and doing and doing and letting the critical mind and the fears inform what I create and how I interact with people. Because then that just ends up pulling me back if I create from that space.
Well, I mean, this spoke to me, this idea of doubling down. That's exactly what I do. The best option, walking away, getting some space, having a break. Never my go-to option, ever. I try to force it. I try to make it work. I'm going to get this perfect. The danger with that, losing perspective, getting completely burned out and dejected, ultimately throwing in the towel on something that doesn't need anything more from me right now. It just needs me to step back and walk away and come back at a later point.
What I've discovered is if I treat myself like a very small child, and how would I treat a small child that I loved? If I noticed they were tired or grumpy or just sort of losing their shit, then I would say, well, what do you need right now? And a lot of times it's something simple like something to eat, or I need some water, or I need to take a nap. And so I've learned that those very simple messages being sent from my actual inner self will guide me a lot of times. So when I find myself feeling critical or really angry at other people, really harsh, a lot of times that's kind of the big red flag for me that says, hang on, you've been connecting too much, you've been expending too much energy out there. You need to go back in and take care of yourself. And so again, for me, that the red flag is, when do I find myself being really snarky, harsh, angry, or critical with people? Sometimes not to their face or, typing or something. Sometimes it's just what's happening inside of my head. But that's like, hang on, you need to come back to yourself.
I so love that this theme has emerged. It's really nice that people are honest about it. Our thoughts are impacted by our energy levels, as is our ability to filter those thoughts, to think about those thoughts. When we lose perspective, we can act against our own best interests, alienating, criticizing, being short with people, not usually effective ways to bring serenity and peace into your life. I keep reminding myself here, it's not about them, it's about how I'm seeing them. What do I have control over in the way that I'm engaged in this situation? When the energy is depleted, it's about damage limitation until the next opportunity to withdraw and recharge.
When I thought about this question, it actually made me chuckle a bit, because what I realized is that I start to count how many people are in the house. So there's 5 of us, plus our dog. So I can tell that that's a time where I am kind of getting full of people. And how soon will the house be empty? So that tells me it's time to, head out for a walk.
This made me laugh. I do that. I count down the minutes until I've got an empty house again. There's nothing worse than having someone changing their plans. They're supposed to go out, but they've decided to stay at home instead. Great. Oh, really nice. Carving out space that's just mine has always been really vital to me. And then it doesn't matter so much if those plans do change. And you're like, yeah, I was hoping for an empty house, but thanks a lot.
I turn into a grouch, and it's quite a stark difference between regular happy-go-lucky cat and people around me will know. The problem with the using me being a grouch as a marker for this is that I'm not always around people. I'm an introvert. I live alone most of the time. So this is when I have to look at other things in my life, other markers. Some of them are I start making mistakes. I start getting a bit resentful. So a bunch of these kind of mood shifts that really can tell me, okay, I'm either spending too much time on my laptop or I'm spending too much time with people. It could be either, because for me, the trick is having this balance. So I tend to notice in my mood.
This is a really interesting point that Kat makes. When we're with people a lot, we can identify the social markers of tiredness. And this highlights another point for introverts and highly sensitive people about the nature of the time that we spend alone. How energizing is it? What are the signs that we're actually unplugged for too long or doing things that aren't really recharging the batteries? Have you ever plugged in a device? I don't know if this happens in America because I don't know if you have the switch, but plug in a device, then come back to it like an hour later, expecting it to be fully charged. Then you realize you forgot to turn the socket on at the wall. We might do this kind of thing with our alone time. We'll be away from people. We think we're kind of plugged in, but actually that's not enough. We haven't turned the kind of the creator of the energy on, so that we're actually just staying drained rather than creating new energy. And we're going to explore more of that in the next part.
Well, I try not to get to the point of where I'm like, oh, I have to recharge my batteries. So I recharge my batteries every day. One of the ways I do that is I do live alone. And even if I didn't, I would need to spend a lot of alone time because I love and need a lot of alone time. So because I don't live with anyone but myself, I do get a lot of time to myself. So I do get a lot of opportunity to recharge my batteries. But I do work online and I do work on my computer, and there will be a point as if I'm working on my computer for too long that I will start to get a headache. My body will start to tell me it's time to get off the computer, and I listen to that.
So physical symptoms of tiredness, headaches, sleepiness, tension in the neck and jaw, grinding teeth. For me, these are big ones. Also, when I'm lethargic and unmotivated to move, this is big. If I can't be bothered to exercise, then I know that exercise is probably going to be a good idea for me right now. It's probably going to be something that feeds more energy in me. Different types of energy are created when we spend other types of energy. For me, exercise creates mental capacity and the ability to think more clearly and more creatively.
And it's when I start taking myself too seriously. I know that I've wandered off track when the world starts getting very narrow and very rigid. I start telling big stories in my head about how everything is full of drama and absolutes. My thoughts and my internal monologue dominate all of my attention, or I zone out and start behaving in mindless ways, like just endlessly staring at my phone. When I realise I've lost large chunks of time to rumination or numbing out, when I'm not really paying attention to my environment or the people around me, that's when I need to stop and recalibrate.
These are observations that hit home for me. Numbing out, rumination, not paying attention. I find it when I start taking my self-set obligations too seriously and really kind of hoarding and protecting my alone time. I know it sounds in some way counterintuitive, but if I've plugged into solitude for too long, I'm getting drained by a creative project or snowed under by my self-inflicted to-do list, and then I start saying no to things like time with close friends and family and exercise and simple things that are actually going to contribute to my well-being and health. I know I'm doubling down in a way that is not going to be good for me in the long run.
I have a history of chronic fatigue syndrome. I run myself into the ground and then I crash and then I do it again. And now I'm a parent and I'm really struggling. And so the signs that I normally look for are that I'm in physical pain, and that's not ideal. So I'm starting to notice things like when I start getting grumpy with the people who I love, when I start feeling hopeless about the state of the world, when I start getting irritable and short-tempered. Those are all signs for me that I need to take some time to myself and recharge my batteries.
This reminds me of Tracy Cooper's observation. The two sides to this question. How do we know we're overwhelmed in a one-off situation? And how do we know our routine and daily habits are not serving us in a kind of sustainably energetic way? This is a tough question to ask ourselves because we always feel like we should be able to do more than we can. The temptation is always to just put one more responsibility, one more obligation on the list. But auditing our daily energy requires an openness to have a kind of wide-angle lens on our lives. Once our energy creation habits and routines are in place, what capacity and bandwidth do we have left over to give to our meaningful projects and people and goals during this season? It's so often less than we would hope for, less than we would expect, and less than we generally commit to as well, which can become a problem.
I think there's several different kinds of recharge. I think that mentally, as artists, as creative people, we kind of dip at the well and we don't know how much water is left in the well.
It's a really interesting metaphor from Jim. Thinking of energy as water in the well. We take from the well and we can be sure there is enough in there if we're actively and consciously filling up the well at other times as well. Finding sources to feed it and allowing those sources to keep topping up that well.
Well, I feel tension in my body, that inner tremble, and I'm actually losing my balance. And often I lose access to my brains. Can't find words, can't think, can't decide on anything. It would be nice to notice that sooner, but it is typical to me in stressful situation or when I feel stressful to keep doing what I'm doing, although I feel awful already. But I just can't make myself stop. I'm a living example of trying to live according to an old Finnish saying. What creates it will cure it. That is not at all good saying for me, though, to follow. So I wish I could be more perceptive to early signs of overwhelm and take breaks. That is my challenge.
I really had to smile with this one from Tula. Very much me, losing access to my brains, my default response to overwhelm. I just kind of shut down. My brain says, nah, you're done. You're done, Andy. Come on. Right. And it happens in situations where I'm overwhelmed. It happens when I haven't taken enough sustainable care of my energy over time. My inner computer just shuts down. I go into mental hibernation. I'm like, I can't function. And that's it. So it's interesting to think of longer term signs. This is where it can get insidious. For me, I've noticed at times, if I've been consistently sort of drinking alcohol, for example, over a long period of time, my mood travels on a dipping trajectory. It's not obvious as it's happening because it's kind of general and it's gradual. But I'll enter into a like a depression where fatalistic stories begin to creep into my thinking, and I feel zoned out and disconnected from things that matter to me normally. The same happens if we're consistently burning a little too much energy. It feels manageable, but over time the residue builds up around us and our feet kind of get stuck in that residue. Everything feels heavier and it gets more difficult to shift things, to move forwards.
And I know for me it shows up as agitation. It shows up as depression. I can feel sort of numbed out and just disconnected. It shows up as anxiety. It shows up for me as feeling like I'm having a hard time letting go of work. When I'm thinking about work all the time, I know it's time to recharge my batteries. So these are some telltale signs, energy feeling low, for me, that it's time for me to do the first thing that's important for me in recharging my batteries, which is to unplug.
So for Karina Nickerson, as we will hear in the next part, unplugging is the key. Retreat, digital rest, detaching from those things that keep us hitched to the external world in negative ways.
I wish I could say that I am very aware of my inner signals, and whenever I start to get tired, I rest, and I'm always on top of it with good nutrition, but that sadly is not the case. I have a lot of demands in my life, one of them being a 4-year-old son, so a lot of times I will push myself over the red line and then kind of hit the wall and fall down and get burned out. When I get burned out, I would say the number one thing that happens for me is I feel very overstimulated. I will get frequent headaches. I get very cranky, and I completely lose my sense of humor. If I completely lose my sense of humor and I'm not finding anything funny, I know that something's wrong and that I've really hit that red line.
Man, yeah, humor is huge. An amazing indicator into our well-being. And if we lose it as a sense, we run into all sorts of potential trouble. We might misinterpret the words and actions of others, people who don't mean any harm whatsoever, but we take personally and we take seriously these things that are just meant as friendly gestures. We'll certainly lose healthy perspective on what matters most when we lose our sense of humor.
Typically, it's when I notice I'm getting really emotional, I'm getting kind of goopy, I'm less productive. It used to be the case that I would kind of power through that because it's like, I can. And then it would just be, I'd end up with massive like adrenal fatigue and insomnia and anxiety. And like I would just push myself to an extreme. And now I would say I'm getting much better at honing in on the more subtle changes, and I'm course correcting much faster. So I'm typically tired. I'll notice I'm more emotionally sensitive, so I get triggered by things I otherwise wouldn't. I'm more inclined to fall suit in like magical thinking, and by that I just mean it can be very dark, like, oh, the world is a gloomy, dark place, and I'm just gonna wait for the universe to get into alignment and it's like, there's nothing wrong, by the way, with wanting to be in alignment with the universe. I'm not saying that, but I would say I know when I need to recharge my batteries when I'm not being discerning, I'm not being clear, I'm not being deliberate. I'll notice I need to recharge my batteries when I stop being good about having healthy boundaries. And I start just kind of letting go of the wheel and being like, oh, life is too hard. So if I notice those thought processes coming on board and coming online, that's when it's a good indicator for me to kind of step back and kind of process, okay, what's going on in there? Let me get really clear so that I can be more discerning.
So this is an interesting thing to think about. For me, how do I interact with things like the news and other stuff that I have no control over, but definitely have a reaction to? The word Leah used was triggered, which we hear a lot these days. It's a word worth reflecting on for ourselves. What triggers those gut reactions in us, and how do we respond to those reactions? That's the bit we have control over when we're energized, when we're in control of ourselves. Are our responses contributing to the core values and positive drives that we want our lives to reflect? Or are we being led by something else? By a sign that we are perhaps in need of recharging our batteries?
I try to actually, know before or kind of prevent that my batteries are drained. And so I try to go for a walk every day. Twice per week I go with a friend, so it's kind of a fun / exercise. I really like this book by Jonathan Fields called How to Live a Good Life, and he talks about these buckets. And one of I can't remember now, I shouldn't have brought it up because I don't remember exactly, but basically one of the buckets is about connection, about relationships. And so when I read that book, I'm like, wow, I don't take enough time to nurture these relationships and connections.
So there's a theme here, buckets. And the well that Jim mentioned, buckets and wells go together. When we fill the well with meaningful connection and health-centered vitality, we're able to withdraw good, positive, wholesome energy from that well every day.
As an introvert, I know it's time to recharge my batteries. Generally speaking, whenever I've been, I don't know if you can hear that, that's my cat. She's part of recharging my batteries, but I can tell just by default, anytime that I've been around too many people for too long and had too much stimulation coming my way, I kind of hit a wall, and I know that it's time to retreat and recharge. But I know more specifically, especially since I spend most of my time working solo here out of my home where I am right now, I can feel, I feel tired. I feel unfocused. Like I have a lot of trouble getting my brain wrapped around things. I find myself finding excuses to, go down rabbit holes of different things, whether it's related to my work or not. And I have been prone to, mild depression for most of my life. And I have that under control through various means. But when I'm, really at my, the end of my bandwidth, I can feel some of those symptoms of that start to creep back into my psyche. And I'm a naturally optimistic person. And so what I know when I start feeling a little fatalistic or like things are a bit gloom and doom, that's a sign to me that I really need to, take a step back and recharge.
I love what Beth says here. And it's a reminder that it is simple. It's just not easy. There's a real tendency to double down when we get unfocused, when we struggle to understand or we get stuck. Give ourselves permission to loosen our grip and walk away. But that is not easy. As if you've ever tried learning a new skill, the best way to kind of step up to the next level is often to walk away for a bit when you're feeling tired and frustrated, when you just cannot get it right. You can't get the thing that you are so desperate to get. And it's often the moment that you then come back to it after a good rest, especially after a sleep, suddenly your brain has kind of processed, it's organized, it's sifted through, it's made sense of things. And suddenly you can do it. You can do it a whole lot better than you could before. Neil picks up on this sign as well.
I usually just hit a point where I simply can't do things anymore. It's obviously better if I don't hit that point, but more often than not, I'll kind of drive myself to the point where it's like, I need to stop and I need to calm down and I need to slow down. So that's it, really. Before that, there's a general feeling of tiredness and being run down and feeling demotivated and unable to actually engage with anything that I'd normally be excited to do. But I try to avoid getting to that situation in the first place.
It's just such a big indicator for me. Things that I normally love, normally really excited to do, they kind of just lose their meaning and I get disconnected from them in some way.
I think the biggest thing is that I lose perspective. Things that were formerly clear and had meaning and purpose and a position and a place seem pointless all of a sudden, and I can find myself feeling sluggish or irritable. That's a big one. You can ask my wife about that one. And even kind of my appetites, I suppose. Food, for example, I will start eating worse and worse. I will start eating more. I can feel myself drifting toward that point, and I realise that some things, I'm coming off the rails a little bit, and it's at that time that I tend to switch everything off, take a step back from all that I'm doing, unless there's a deadline that I can't miss, and allow myself some time to breathe. And, you know, sometimes just a day or two away can make the biggest difference on regaining that perspective and finding the joy in the work I'm doing.
So I really like Mark's emphasis here on finding the joy. You know, it's a really nice place to finish here on the thing we want, the thing that drives us. Returning to that last session, when we've lost that positive driver, the value or vision underpinning our sense of purpose, if we can hold our feelings up to that, we might well see that it's time to step back and rest and recharge. And so I just want to finish with what Jacqueline Strickland says. I start to feel hopeless and lethargic. Ironically, I've come to realize this reality is just another part of life to accept and explore and continue on with the journey. I mean, this is the purpose of looking at these signs. You know, acceptance, exploration, and learning. We're not trying to change the signs. We're not trying to eradicate them. This isn't about saying, well, I shouldn't feel irritated or hopeless or lethargic. It's about accepting that that is what we do feel. For us, they are the signs that we are kind of doing a bit too much, that we are in need of rest and recuperation. That we're free to explore the times, the places, the context for which we feel them. You know, what causes those things? So that we can learn, we can raise awareness, and we can manage our energy in ways that keep us sustained and calm and fully engaged in the things that matter most to us. So that we can be more intentional about the way that we design life, the things that we invest our energy into. Simple, not necessarily easy. So in the next part, we'll look at some of our kind of go-to sources of self-care and rest. We'll begin to think about the kinds of practices and habits and mindsets that we can use to reach that place of sustenance and gentleness and growth. Yeah, I'll see you soon for the third part in this series. Really looking forward to speaking to you again soon.